This is E&P Reports from Editor and Publisher Magazine, the authoritative voice of news media since 1884, serving newspapers, broadcasts, digital, and all multimedia news publishing. And hi, once again, Mike Blinder, publisher of Editor and Publisher Magazine. Quick housekeeping, if you are listening to us on the various podcast platforms our audio segments are on, please follow us. Watching us on our YouTube channel, smash that little subscribe button below, hit the bell to the right. You'll get an update each and every time we upload a new episode of E&P Reports. I am really happy to introduce our audience to Sam Gregory. Sam, you are the program director of Witness. You've been doing it for what, just a few months? Just kidding, 22 years in the same place. You're in New York City. For those that don't know Witness, a leading global organization incorporating video and related technology into human rights advocacy. Do I have that pretty much as your mission statement, sure?
That's absolutely correct. We work globally with the range of ordinary people and journalists who take out their smartphones and try and film what's happening in the world.
Well, my question to you is, if you started this 22 years ago, did you start with beta and VHS tape? I mean, now we're in this digital world. How did you foresee 22 years ago there would be a need to incorporate video into advocacy? Was it just you saw the picture?
We were actually founded 30 years ago, or over 30 years ago, and actually what sparked us was in the US was the Rodney King incident. So someone filming them with one of those, big cameras that he had probably bought to film, weddings or family events, filming that incident of police violence. So we were started way back then in the era of, the tape camera and not widespread cameras. And what's happened is every few years we've had to keep pace with what's changing in the landscape of video and technology. So I actually remember the first year I joined Witness, we had one of the first streaming video channels online. Wow. So we had a real networks-based, video channel where you could watch, human rights videos in the year 2000. So, and ever since then, every time there's a change in how we access video and technology, we think about what its implications are for
But back
truth
then,
and trust.
you just didn't see this world where it was heading back then, I'm sure.
I don't think so. I think that would have been predicting too much. I think there was a vision that said, look, there's going to be more people who are going to have the ability to show what's happening, and how do you make sure they can do that in a way that's meaningful and truthful and ethical. But did we envision the iPhone? I'm not sure.
No. So that's Witness, and we're not here to discuss the technology in a way. We're here to discuss a word, deep fake, which I'm still not sure if you can play in Scrabble or not. Keeping me honest during this broadcast, who's been with me umpteen times, I'm honored to have the great Gretchen Peck. Gretchen, our contributing editor here at Editor and Publisher. Gretchen, you're doing stories on this. We're going to be doing a story in the magazine on this. So are you ready to keep me honest with Mr. Gregory?
Absolutely. Thank you, Sam, for joining us. I really appreciate it.
And we'll get to all of that right after this.
This episode of E&P Reports is sponsored by IQ Audience Plus by Town News. Consumer revenue has never been more important. Digital leaders at media organizations worldwide are asking the same question. How do we accelerate the growth of consumer revenue? Traditional one-size-fits-all paywalls aren't the answer. They're blunt instruments that treat all visitors the same way, costing you money. IQ Audience Plus by Town News is a smart, dynamic metering solution that empowers you to maximize revenue by identifying key audiences, seeding engagement, and growing membership and subscriptions. Ready to supercharge your consumer revenue, grow engagement, and bolster your advertising income? Visit townnews.com/EP today to learn more about IQ Audience Plus by Town News.
All right. May I call you Sam? Is that okay, sir?
That's fine.
Okay. Now, I want to share something with you, if I may, and I'm going to do something kind of interesting here now. I'm going to put on my full screen, and we know that a ton of our audience here at E&P is listening to audio only. But the reason I'm putting on this screen is, Sam, recently I signed a whole mess of documents with an AI company. And this is the vodcast that you're currently on is getting so popular that an international organization would like to have my voice instantly translated into Spanish and Portuguese. Does that make sense, sir? Are you with me?
Yep.
So here is my voice in English. Here we go. This is E&P Reports, a vodcast from Editor and Publisher. since 1884, the authoritative voice of news publishing. Now, you speak Spanish, correct, sir? You're bilingual. So tell me if this is accurate, because all I know is cerveza and el baño. So let me play this for you now.
Esto es E&P Reports, un servicio de editor y publisher magazine. Desde 1884, la voz autorizada de la publicación de noticias.
Now, technically, through AI, was just recreated, because I looked up the definition of this word deep fake, a new media technology wherein a person simply takes existing text, picture, video, or audio, and then manipulates it, i.e. fakes it, to look like or sound like someone else. Is that why this company maybe signed 1 million different disclosure agreements that I didn't think I was getting into this weird world when they offered to take my voice and translate it, but you have become a global expert on this. Is this correct? Kind of backing into it through witness. Is that right, sir?
Yeah. So this is, when I was talking about the way the work has evolved, right? So in the witness work, we're looking at how people create truthful videos, how they share information that's trustworthy. And so a few years back, we'd seen a lot of what we call shallow fakes, which I'm not sure is a Scrabble word either, but shallow fakes are just when someone edits a video or changes the caption or claims it's from a different date or time. And we started to hear about deep fakes, which, as you described them, are exactly that. It's a way to create a realistic representation of someone saying or doing something they never did. So sometimes it's manipulating an existing image. So it could be like I take your lips and I make them move to a different soundtrack. Sometimes it could be literally creating, the whole body of you or your face moving in a particular way. Or it could be doing what you've got in this, which is, creating a realistic cloned voice of someone. And they all carry these questions of, right, when is it ethical to use it? So you're describing a great example of, one of the emerging ethical and commercial usages, which is, right, you consented to that, I think, with all those forms. You gave them a structured set of samples of your voice.
Oh, about 4 hours worth. And then they needed another 3.
Yeah. So they took a lot, right? They took what's called training data and
Yes.
they fed it in to build a model of your voice. And that training data in your case was your voice. In the case of, say, a deep fake face swap, it would be images of your face. In the case of, other types of imagery, it could be that they just need to sort of develop a model that works to, for example, manipulate removing objects in a video, right? So it's a generic model.
I came across you watching I guess it was more of a human interest story on CNN or MSNBC. You were the expert. And I was drinking my coffee on a weekend morning. And I believe the topic, and I could be wrong, was how Tom Cruise was recreated by some pop star. And then you got into all the technology about it. And then recently, at the time of this recording, there has been an actual deep fake video created by supposedly Moscow that is now showing Zelensky, this was just like a week ago or two, claiming that we surrender. So we're taking it from Tom Cruise to something so amazingly odd. And it looked like him, it sounded like him, but it wasn't him. So where are we today, Sam? And I'm going to let Gretchen respond after this, but is this where we're at today? We got to watch every single thing we're seeing in media today and give it the benefit of the doubt?
Yeah, so actually the two examples you're naming are really good examples to help us understand what we should fear and what we shouldn't. So Tom Cruise video came out of last year, came out on TikTok, deep Tom Cruise, really good video. It looks like Tom Cruise, mannerisms are right, face looks great. A lot of people were taken in, but it was made by a very talented VX expert who used a really talented impersonator, did work on it afterwards. It's sort of the best in show type example. And that's hard to do, right? So it's not like everyone can create a fake, a fully moving fake puppet of you that says and does things you don't want. And the Zelensky video is super interesting because it's an example of a not very good deep fake. And also some good practices in preparing for it. So the Zelensky video, for those who haven't seen it, he appears at a podium, his body is quite static, his face is quite static, the body doesn't look like Zelensky's body, and the face doesn't really move right as he says some words that are essentially saying he's surrendering, right? And so it's not very convincing, and a lot of people in the deepfakes world were like, well, no one would be taken in by it. But I think part of the problem is we also have the context of knowing what happened around that video. And this goes to how, news people and journalists and others prepare, is like the Ukrainian government had said, hey, we're worried there's going to be a deep fake, which is known as sort of, pre-bunking something that said, hey, watch out, there's going to be a deep fake that's going to come out showing him surrendering. The video comes out, and almost instantly, he's able to say, it's not me, I'm alive, I'm here, I didn't say this. And he can broadcast over to millions of people on Instagram and Telegram and everything else. So the Zelensky case is almost the best case of how deepfakes play out in real life, which is badly made deepfake, which we've all been warned about very specifically, right? There's going to be a surrender deepfake, and then a response that's really rapid in rebutting it, that's really credible because people trust Zelensky in Ukraine and because he has this massive reach. And I think the complicated thing is that is such a best case as we look at other contexts where you don't have those resources, you don't have that access, and the trajectory of deepfakes, not the reality. So when I say, I don't think people should worry about a deepfake around every corner, they should worry about, someone fooling them on TikTok with a video where someone switched the audio or claimed it's one place and it's not another. But the trajectory of the technology is pointing towards this getting easier to do. And so as we start to look at that, then we need to think, what are the kind of protections we have in place? What are the ways we deal with this as it gets easier? But we shouldn't, and this is something we say at Witness all the time, we shouldn't panic, we should prepare, because these kind of political uses of deepfakes are relatively limited. Now, the one thing I would say is there is a really important damaging use of deepfakes that's very prevalent now, which is when people take women's faces and swap them onto naked bodies in video and photos to create non-consensual sexual images. And that is a widespread problem, and of course is used to target ordinary women, journalists, public figures. And so we're already seeing the malicious side of deepfakes, but it's not really about the political side so much. It's about those targeted attempts to harass and attack women.
Gretchen.
So I'd like to explore, Sam, if we could, a little bit more about the technology and sort of how that's evolved. It seems to me like you have an intersection of photo manipulation tools, video editing, and AI, as Mike pointed out. How accessible are these technologies to the masses? Is this CGI for the masses today?
Yeah, I think putting it in the historical context really helps. So like CGI for the masses, because you could have done stuff like this in Hollywood 25 years ago, right?
Sure.
Like, the trajectory of this is developed. It depends what we're saying, right? So, there are plenty of consumer apps where you can swap faces now, which seems kind of incredible, but like that's true, right? Like if you use Reface or impressions, or if you use filters on Snap or Instagram, you're using these tools. Some parts have got easier, right? So things that have got easier, the ability to do what are known as lip sync dubbing, which is when you make lips move to an audio track, is definitely getting easier. You're seeing it being deployed more easily in commercial contexts, right? So that's a good example where it's getting easier. It's getting easier to do voice cloning, right? Mm-hmm. The type of thing that Mike had happen. Though the companies that are doing it are trying to keep it within these boxes of like, we're going to use it in a very controlled way and tested. It's easier to remove an object in a video, right? If you have the latest Google Android phone, like you can erase an object in the background, just rub it out with your finger. It's called Magic Eraser. So those are all getting easier. The ability to get an avatar that just moves, kind of in time with you, like a kind of puppet that you can manipulate. What is still hard is doing a really good moving video deepfake in a complicated situation. So like faking me walking down a street in a complicated environment, really hard, right? To do that really well. So I think it's, again, and I spend a lot of my time looking at threat models. I think we often over-focus from the threat side as journalists and activists and on the kind of the face swap deepfakes, while other parts of it are getting easier and can be used much more maliciously. And there was research from 2 or 3 years ago that found that people had a hard time spotting the lip sync dubs, which is when you make the lips move. Mm-hmm. And there was research from just about a month ago that came out from Professors Hani Farid and Nightingale that looked at people's ability to recognize AI-generated faces of people who never existed. So this is a thing that you see, and there was a big story in NPR just recently about thousands of photos on LinkedIn of profile photos that were actually made by these tools. One's called This Person Doesn't Exist, that basically create realistic photos of humans who never existed. They're like faces of the person who never existed. And we're starting to see those. Those are very easy to do. You can just go onto any website online and get, a face of someone who never existed made. And we're definitely seeing those being used, for example, in misinformation and disinformation campaigns and commercial scams and, dating scams on apps. So it really is a spectrum.
I got to ask, and Gretchen, while you're teeing up your next question, I want to stay on this because I don't want to go on. What threat models are you looking at? Or is that something I'm not allowed to hear about? I mean, companies pay you to come up with models for deepfake threats? Is that what's
going on? So what we do, and this goes back to kind of where I come from as someone working at Witness, is, what we observed when we first started looking at deepfakes, it seemed to focus most on the people who are best protected, right? So it was always like someone's going to deepfake President Trump, or someone's going to deepfake, Macron. And those are the folks who actually are incredibly well placed to defend against deepfakes, and they're vulnerable, but they have a lot of layers of protection. And so the way we approached the Witness is we actually did both the first meetings in Silicon Valley that brought together a diverse group of people, but then we followed that up by bringing together people around the world who had faced similar problems. We said, look, when you see this technology, what do you worry about? What are the threat vectors you worry about? And so, people would say, yes, I'm worried about, someone faking a presidential candidate. They'd also say, look, my biggest problem now is I already get sent, photos that have been manipulated to make me appear like I'm in a compromising situation. So the ability to stick my face on a nude body is threatening as someone who's vulnerable. Or they'd say things, and this particularly came from journalists and human rights defenders. They'd say, look, already when we have a piece of compromising citizen footage, the first thing the government says, the first thing, say, state-affiliated media in a country like Myanmar says is, look, it's been faked. And deepfakes both, of course, could be faked media, right? You could increasingly fake media, but it's also a lot easier just to say it's been faked and put the pressure on journalists and civil society to prove it's real, right? Yeah. So these are the types of threat models. And then you have to ask, well, okay, so this is a very real threat model. It's already playing out. How do we start thinking about responses to this, at the tools level, the skills level, what the platforms do, what we look for in regulation? So I'm very transparent on threat models, because I think these are things that are real, and we need to start preparing while the threat space is not huge, right? So there are like sort of a few defined areas where we know we're seeing threats, like non-consensual sexual images, increasing risk that people undermine real footage, increasing fraud audio, so fake audios, these GAN photos, these photos that are used on fake accounts, all of those are happening. And then we're increasingly seeing, and this is one of the most exciting creative areas with deepfakes, is great for satire and parody, right? But you see a lot of people who are sort of playing with the edges, right? Like if you take a video that's really realistic that you claim is made as satire and you stick it out there on the internet, and then people believe it's real, and you don't tell them it was satire or parody because you stripped away the surrounding content. That's a really mischievous way you can use deepfake that plays into a lot of our cultural trends already, right? About how people misuse information online. So as we look at each of those threat patterns, how do we start preparing, and how do we prepare from a more global perspective and a more journalistic and perspective, right?
Yeah, but
so assuming that journalists will be on the front lines.
In such a polarized society, you could prepare all you want to, and people are still going to believe what they want to believe. And now you're really, we could go on for hours on this, but Gretchen, I know you want to steer it more into our industry and all that. So go ahead.
Yeah, well, I think you raise a great point here, Sam, sort of how we prepare, and that's going to be very much of interest to our readers. So I wondered, are there tools available to newsrooms that sort of digitally provide sort of digital forensics that we could test the theories or determine the origins of these types of videos?
Yeah, so we're still in pretty early days on that. That's the sort of the unfortunate news, is like, there tend to be sort of two sort of structural approaches to thinking about dealing with these types of falsifications and forgeries. One is detecting the forgery. The other is proving something is more real, right? Mm-hmm. Or proving that it's not been tampered with. On the detection side, the problem is most of the tools are not great and they require real skills to use. So you have tools that work for one way you create a deepfake or a manipulation, but they don't work for another way. You have tools that work great on like high resolution media, but not on the kind of compressed videos that if you were being mischievous and a bad actor, you'd put out there, you wouldn't produce a high resolution video. And, all of those tools do require skills and are not even very accurate when you do that. So, one of the things we've really been focused on at Witness is really like, how do you think about building tools that actually meet the needs of journalists and human rights defenders? So they have to work for low resolution videos. They have to work on the time frame that a journalist deals with stuff, which is fast. It's not the speed of an academic. And how do you make sure they're accessible to people in a diverse set of geographies, like a Brazilian journalist, a local news reporter in the US, a television reporter in Myanmar? Like, you actually have to think in those scenarios. The problem is the detection tools are not great, but there's also an access question. The second part is, so I'm cautious about recommending stuff because I think you can see people putting it out there. I do think broadly that the media industry needs to think much more about how it learns about media forensics, both with, and that's a general message we've been sending, is actually like deepening and understanding that, yes, of course, if people don't want to believe something's true, they won't believe it, right? To your point, Mike. But like, we still need to defend, like sometimes it is objectively manipulated and you have to show people that, at least show the work of it. And then people can decide whether they care about the manipulation or not as you understand it. The other side of it is authenticity. It's what's known as authenticity infrastructure, or authenticity and provenance infrastructure. And this is a place where a lot of the news media have been moving towards. So there's an initiative called the Content Authenticity Initiative that was launched by Adobe, the New York Times, a number of other groups. There's one called the C2PA, which stands for the Coalition for Content Provenance and Authenticity. And what they're trying to do is develop ways that if you're a journalist or a news producer or even an ordinary person, when you create a video, or a photo on your camera, you can embed signals that explain how it was created and where, and these can be tracked over time, right? So you can share that it was edited in a particular way. You can do edits that might, for example, remove information, but you're explaining the sort of the editorial process to your audience. And so there's a lot of interest on the news media side in that area, because it's a way for you to be able to say, look, this is how we created this. And of course, if a fake comes out, you can say, look, we can show you the real one and the trajectory, and we can prove that this is the real one, or the unmanipulated one.
A watermark of some kind, if I can use that dated term.
I would be a bit cautious about the watermark analogy, because it's not quite a watermark. It's like a set of data that kind of follow it that do change, right? So I think
so more of a blockchain type thing that just
could be on the blockchain, or it could be like a constantly updated sort of signature that contains this data that tells you, like, this video came from here, and then someone blurred the faces here, and then someone transcoded it here to broadcast it, and then it was, so like just shows you the trajectory. So it's actually a bit more
like a chain of custody.
A chain of custody is a good way of thinking about it. Exactly. Like, so it's showing you that trajectory. Watermark always for me is like, most images and photos go through editing, right? So like the idea that like we want to have exactly what a camera person took on the street in place X,
those days are
not that useful, right? Like, it's like, why would, you might sometimes, like for evidence usages, but if you're a journalist or a news outlet, you're going to want to take it into your production process. You might make tweaks that are about, depending on your rules around how you can, change an image or video. You're certainly going to share it onto social and transcode it and change so it's very much about finding a way to do that. And I think it's a really promising approach. And the C2PA just launched their standards in January, and we're starting to see companies building on it. The only concerns, and, I co-chaired the Threats and Harms Task Force in the C2PA, because it's, one of our jobs is to say, look, let's just look at this in a really clear-eyed way. So we came at it as a group and witness. We actually started building tools like this a decade ago, because we were dealing with people trying to prove, war crimes evidence. You film something in Syria and you want to make sure that you can show that this is the process, the chain of custody, and so we come from the extreme scenarios, right?
I just remember that movie Wag the Dog, where they were trying to show how, they built the whole thing. All right, Gretchen, tee up your next question, because I want to paint a scenario now for a local publisher. We have about 4,000 to 5,000 viewers and listeners to this program. They're all news publishers in some way, shape, form, or size, either managing a newsroom, editorial, what have you, or own an operation. So, I'm now in a small, medium-sized market. A source gives me a video. The video is the mayor actually having some kind of lewd act. I'm just going to leave it at that. Yeah. That is submitted to me, and it's corroborated by someone else that this is true. We're now sitting in the boardroom deciding if we're going to release this. The source says it's true. A second source says it's true. Yeah. In today's world, what do you do? Do you just go with it? Because, correct me if I'm wrong, the newspaper is then liable if this is false. I mean, you can't go back and sue the source. What do you do in today's world?
So you're in a kind of a sort of the middle of the sort of potential scenarios. So we've grappled with deepfake scenarios, and we've seen them where there's no way to corroborate it. And I think those are the most challenging ones. It's a single source of video, often in a closed scenario, where it might be low resolution, as, for example, often videos that are compromising situation ones are. Very deliberate. It's a counter forensics tool as well to make them look less good.
Of course.
So in some sense, you're in the middle, because you do have a corroborating source. Because like the way we've been doing trainings with journalists globally, the first thing we say is, look, go back to journalistic principles. Like, if there's a video that's too good to be true, are there alternative views? Are there sources? Or can you find out the motivations of the person who shared it to you? All of those things you should be looking at before you get to the media forensics part, because the media forensics part is harder. And I think that's where in this scenario you have a challenge, is like in a local newsroom, it's unlikely you have the media forensics capacity to analyze this. And the worry, and I've seen this in some situations, is people go, well, let's just see if there's somewhere online I could check this. And we saw this scenario in Myanmar, right? So I know this doesn't feel like a local newsroom in the US, but it's very similar. What happened was there was a video released there that appeared to show someone confessing to corruption. And journalists didn't have the skills and the tools, but people on Twitter and journalists looked online and they found these tools online that said, drop in a video and we'll tell you if it's a deep fake or not. And the problem with those tools is, again, going back to what I said earlier, they don't tend to be reliable. If you don't know how it was done, they can often give you contradictory results. So the last thing you want to do in this newsroom context is say, hey, let's just find an online tool and test it out and see if it gives us a good result. So we want to step away from that. The problem is you don't, unless you have an escalation path to someone who's a media forensics expert, you're a bit stuck here. If it's a good deep fake or it's a good claim of a deep fake, that you need to make sure you're rebutting, right? Like, because you're going to get the pressure back saying this was a deep fake, right? Going back to what I said about what's known as the liar's dividend, which is this ability for the liar to say, no, it could have been faked. You can't trust that video, right? Like, and sort of, you know, the deep fakes give the power to the liar to claim anything is a fake. So you're a bit stuck, right, at the moment, like, because probably what you'd need to do is you'd either go to like the National Center for Media Forensics, you'd go to a local academic who's in this. You might try and go to law enforcement because then law enforcement has some of the media forensics capacities, but we're a bit stuck at the moment, honestly. Like, there's not a good pathway for you to go beyond that. The only good side about the scenario you outlined is there's at least a corroborating source, and there are some other different things at least start you on the trajectory. Now, of course, as you said, the source could be lying. You know, who's going to be lying when you publish this, right? You know, yeah. So we are a bit stuck on this.
We would never have been having this conversation 5 or 6 years ago. The video is the video, the second source, you run with it. It's just great. Gretchen, go ahead, take it away.
I would say I'll throw out one thing, which is just to name, just as a resource. I know that the Partnership on AI, which is a big like multi-stakeholder group, has a project on AI and local media. And so they've really been trying to think from the positive and the negative side about where AI plays out in the local media newsroom. And so interesting. I'm glad they're doing that, because I think often the focus in this tends to be on national level, as I said, and really like the threat vectors are local politicians, or it's targeting people who are, figures in, So,
correct me if I'm wrong. There's a 13-year-old kid that could recreate that fuzzy video that looks like it came out of a door cam now. It's not hard to fake this stuff in today's world. I have a feeling it's going to become the norm more and more and more, to try to trick a journalist to take the story. That's where my fear is right now. Anyway, Gretchen.
So, Sam, I know we came together to talk about deep fakes, but given your role with Witness, I'd be remiss if I didn't ask you about Ukraine and how vital the videos coming out of Ukraine are right now, particularly when credentialed journalists really are finding it challenging to get access. Can you talk a little bit about your observations at Witness about kind of how the citizen journalists there are reporting on the war and why that's so critical for the rest of us?
Yeah, no, this is very much at the heart of Witness's work, is how do you help people document on the ground? And then how do you make sure that the systems that they then place that footage into actually work for them, right? So, what we're seeing in Ukraine is similar to other contexts where Witness works, like, Yemen and Syria and Myanmar, and, some contexts in the US when people are trying to document in situations where there's not a lot of publicity. And what's really critical, and we've been sharing guidance in Russian and Ukrainian, Russian in the parts that are primarily Russian speaking, Ukrainian in other areas, which is really like, what do you have to do to film something in a way that makes it more trustworthy, right? If you're going to share this and it's going to be seen by a journalist who might want to verify it, or seen by a public, how do you film in a way that makes it more trustworthy? How do you also do that in a way that protects yourself? So how do you film in a way that shows context, explains location? How do you then make a smart decision about how to share it, right? If you're revealing your location and your name, which might help someone verify it, you might not want to place it straight out there into social media, which is being monitored by your adversaries. So we're doing a lot of work there. And this is what we see constantly, is that a lot of people who never expected are placed in these situations. So how you help them really think, how am I going to film this? How is it going to make it more trustworthy? How am I going to protect myself? Is very critical. And then, I think the other part of that is many of us are now encountering this footage online, and some of it is filtered by our news organizations, and it's been one of the tremendous innovations of the past decade, is what's known as open source intelligence and kind of verification of footage online. And so we're really seeing how news organizations help contextualize this footage. but we're also encountering it in spaces like TikTok and Facebook and YouTube. And that's the more problematic side. And I think there are real challenges there because, you know, you can watch footage from Ukraine and sometimes we feel tremendously close to, for example, these young women who've been showing these accounts from directly inside Kyiv. At the same time, we're seeing a lot of misinformation there, a lot of manipulated media, and the platforms don't do a great job in separating this out. So you don't need deepfakes when it's super easy on a platform like TikTok to switch the audio. It's super easy to claim something's from one time when it's another. So it's a complicated scenario. You've got to help the people on the ground. You've got to help the viewers. And you've also got to think, what is it that like the platforms that are used to share this, whether they're actually working for the types of really important usages that we need them to do.
Mm-hmm. I think we have two separate issues here that both could be discussed for hours. Number one, what is a real video or a real audio segment versus one that is manufactured? And I have a feeling there'll be more and more of those created to try to tell a false narrative. The second is any victim of a story where the facts are corroborated by text or video or audio could now claim that was manipulated, prove me wrong. Do I pretty much have it?
I think so.
I'm sorry, Sam. So much of what newsrooms do today compared to just 5 or 10 years ago is really fact checking and reporting on misinformation, disinformation. It's kind of part of the gig now, I think.
Yeah.
And you might be able to have some firsthand experience with that.
Yeah. No, and that's what we heard also globally. And like we also did we co-organized a meeting with the BBC where we brought together major news in Europe as well, is people definitely saying, look, it's part of the beat now, right? We have to disprove it. But the prove me wrong is a really challenging part of it. It's the ability to just ramp up the demands in the pacing of a newsroom context, in the pacing of a news context to say, prove this is actually not faked rather than so actually proving real as well as, and challenging people who just say, well, it could have been faked. Right. So how do you do that? And, we're seeing good work in the Ukraine context, like, if you follow, like, some of the people who are doing great work debunking and really illustrating and explaining it to people, the well-resourced newsrooms can keep pace. We definitely heard from a lot of the journalists we talked to in our consultations, like a worry, like we already feel pretty stretched. We're already in the center of kind of like this contestation about what the truth is. And now you're asking us to do even more of this, like proving something is real, including in this kind of media forensics approach that is not something we're used to, and also perhaps incorporating some of these OSINT techniques and verification techniques that not all newsrooms have quite got to. It's still a learning process. So I think we've got some rocky years ahead. And it's really how we start investing now about like, how do the tools accessible? How do we build capacity in those news organizations?
Well, Sam, I want to thank you for having us now really feel unsettled in our industry because with everything that's been going on, this is just, correct me if this is the beginning. Yep. As the technology advances and the sources change, more and more and more is going to center on, is this true or not true? And boy, and you didn't see that 20 some odd years ago, I bet, when you guys, started looking at video as a source for advocacy. But somehow you wound up in the right place at the right time.
The only thing I would say is like, it's sort of funny you say that, because it's sort of like people who work in human rights are kind of always the canary in the coal mine. So even when I started working, usually people would always claim a video was faked, right? If you ever had anything powerful, the first response to say was a video was faked. Now they had less grounds to do that, it was less volume. And so like, it's funny, like I do think about human rights often as, we're the canaries in the coal mine because we see problems as they're, impacting people in ways you don't expect. But yeah, I don't think we anticipated the scale. We didn't anticipate it would play out in this way. I'm not totally pessimistic, I have to say, Mike. I want to be careful. Like, I think we can, the more we play into the, like, you'll never be able to believe anything, the more we make it easy for people to claim stuff is fake. So we need to sort of, again, as I say, prepare but not panic. Like, it's getting easier to use deepfakes, but people are working on tools to authenticate and detect it now. How do we give access to them? We need to start talking to the public about this. But the last thing we want to do is make people think there's a deepfake behind every door and write every video they encounter as a deepfake, because in fact that plays into the hands of people who want to basically dismiss real footage.
There we go. Sam, if people want more information about Witness, contact your organization and learn more about the incredible work you guys do, how do they find you online?
So simplest address is witness.org, or we're on Twitter, Facebook, Instagram, same type of address, just look for Witness.
Thank you so much for your valuable time, sir. This has been the beginning, I think, of a very, very, very long conversation that I'm so glad you were able to help us frame. Thank you for your time.
No, thank you.